About 2 months ago, I finally went ahead and got myself some frogs for the animal room. These little goofballs are called Fire-Bellied toads. And for now they live in this 45-liter tank. Now this has never been a long-term vision for these frogs. This is just a temporary home I set up to get a feel for their behavior, see if there's any aggression between them, and see what features they like to use, what features they don't really like to use, so I can get a feel for how their final home should look like. Now over the past 2 months I've already gotten quite a good feel for what they do and do not like. Unfortunately there is a bit of aggression among the frogs, so today I thought it would be a good idea to use the old ropefish tank to set up an even bigger temporary tank for my fire-bellied toads. And as you can see, I already tried figuring out some kind of escape in here. Now I don't have any matching types of wood or rocks left at the moment, so it's gonna be a mismatch of a few different types of wood. Yeah, it'll be a cool challenge, but before we really get started figuring out how this tank should look like, let me first remove everything out of this tank and take some elements out of their current tank, and then we can get started scaping this new one. So I went ahead and set up this tub with some water and 2 rocks. And this tub will hold the frogs while I break down their old home and build them a new one. So the first thing I did was grab the frogs and put them in this temporary container. The first 8 were easy enough to catch, but the last one was hidden away pretty well. So I decided to gently take elements out, being very careful that I don't accidentally crush the last frog. Eventually I found him, and after that I could easily take everything else out. And I rinsed everything off camera. Over at the new tank I first wanted to add some sand. And then added 2 of these spawn baskets. The idea was to add some aqua soil on the bottom and cover it with some pebbles. But I quickly realized I didn't have materials to pull that off. So what I did instead was first add a layer of filter sponge, then add the aqua soil, and finally add some gravel over top. I did this for both of the baskets, but I kept all of the gravel in only one of the baskets to make it a little bit easier to plant later on. I also added 2 bags of aqua soil underneath the sand in between the baskets. I then began playing around with various pieces of wood and stone I had available. I want to place the elements in such a way as to break up the tank into multiple smaller areas and break up the frogs' line of sight as much as possible. The frogs are getting along pretty well, but around feeding time they can get a bit aggressive, and I believe that by setting the tank up this way, it will help keep their aggression down. After messing with the hardscape, I eventually ended up with this design, which means we can now start adding the plants. And I started out by first placing plants from the previous home. These include a small peace lily, some Opiopogon species, and a few syngoniums. The only difference is that I decided to take them out of their pots this time around. This allowed me to more evenly distribute them around the tank. Next, I also added a few small pieces of this rabbit's foot fern. I then began adding small pebbles, and these really help make the whole island feel more cohesive. Next, I also added a few cuttings of Ficus pumila and a cutting of Ficus pumila corsifolia, also known as oak leaf creeping fig. After that I also added an Anubias gold coin, and finally I also added a few patches of moss. And now we can finally fill the tank with water. I also had to make a small modification to the lid. I cut a small hole into it and attached a piece of screen over top. This way there will be some ventilation in the tank. I think it's looking pretty good, but it's still missing something. The frogs. I added them back in there and allowed them to settle in peace. Back the next day and you can see the Mopani wood already stained the water slightly brown. I'm not really going for that vibe, so we're gonna do a quick water change. I also noticed a few small patches of mold appearing, so I added a group of springtails in there to help get rid of it. Now I think that already looks much better, but as I was doing the water change, I took a quick peek at the tank underneath and I saw some plants I want to use in this setup. So down here we have this pothos, which I think will look really cool in the tank up above. But then I thought I got a lot of these crypts. I think they will look really good as well. Just as this dwarf Sagittaria would also look really good scattered along the edge of the water. So let's get the plants out of this tank and into the frog tank. I think those last few plants really made this thing pop, and I'm just really happy when I look at this. It's such an improvement from their previous home, and it kind of makes me feel guilty for putting the frogs in that small tank. They look so much better in this setup, and I just can't wait to make their forever home. It's gonna be amazing and the frogs will love it too. Now you may have also noticed that I didn't include any sort of filter in this tank, and that's because I'm gonna mainly rely on all of the plants and frequent water changes to keep this thing clean. Sure, it is a bit annoying to do a lot of water changes, but I don't intend for these frogs to stay in here long term. Before the end of the year, I want to have made their forever home, moved the frogs in there, taken this tank down and built something completely new in its place. That's a lot of work, but there's also 4 months left this year, so I think we can manage. But that's about it for this week's video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you're hungry for more frog content, I recommend you watch this video next. I'll see you there.